Season 2 of Notebook on Cities and Culture is brought to you by Carl Haley and Daniel Murphy. Behind me, we see a world map on your wall. What is this here to remind you of?
The world map is a very fine map that you can find at almost every IKEA location in the United States. And I say that because I recently saw a Facebook photo of someone else in their residence with this very same map. It's a wonderful, huge map. I often stare at it when I'm in my living room or kitchen, and I think about the places I've been to, and I think about the places I've yet to go, but want to visit in the near future.
It is Notebook on Cities and Culture. I'm Colin Marshall, coming to you from San Francisco, specifically South Beach, speaking with entrepreneur, blogger, author, traveler, learner, Ben Casnocha, back on the show, you might say, or back from the previous incarnation of the show, The Marketplace of Ideas. It's been about, 5 years now? So lots of change to discuss here, but he does have a new book out now. It is called The Startup of You, co-authored with Reid Hoffman, co-founder of LinkedIn. And with a project like that behind you, I mean, are you one of these people who, when you get something big done like that, it's time to travel, it's time to get a new headspace, time to reset your mind somehow?
I think everyone who achieves a long-term goal or in some other way reaches the end of a project always, I think, announces to the world and to themselves that they're going to take some time off, some time to reflect, some time to travel, some time to read, spend time with family. It's the classic, manic executive who retires and announces that they're going to do a world trip, and then 3 weeks later has already started another company or is back on the job in some way. I don't think that quite happened to me, though kind of. The book shipped, or was published rather, in February of this year. It's now early September, and I pushed on marketing for the first 4 or 5 months after it came out. And so the last couple months have been a bit more reflective. I have given myself time and space to think about what I want to do and think about the lessons that I've learned the last 2.5 years of working on the book.
And people may also know you from your blog, writing about entrepreneurship and books and intellectual life. And there was a popular post about you're going to an extended meditation retreat, which sounds like, retreat is maybe the wrong word, because there was no ease about that, right?
That's right. About a month and a half ago, I went on a 10-day silent meditation retreat here in Northern California, in which the class learned about Vipassana meditation, which is a technique out of India. And it is called a retreat, but it's in fact a very focused, intensive course in which you wake up early in the morning and go to bed relatively late at night, and every hour of that day is highly scheduled, and you learn a meditation technique called Vipassana. And I did that because, kind of along the lines of what we're talking about in terms of space to reflect, when you spend 10 consecutive days without writing, reading, or speaking to anyone, you have quite a bit of time to yourself to think about things.
Tell us a bit about where your mind went. I mean, where it started off and where it wound up in the course of these 10 days.
The most surprising thing that happened in terms of where my mind went is I'm reminded of a phrase. I can't remember if it's Joan Didion or someone else who talks about reheating stale memories. Many stale memories got reheated without me intending to, but memories from all parts of my life, every year of my existence, from all different in all different contexts, and not all meaningful memories. Sometimes just the randomness things that I just totally forgotten about surface to conscious attention. Part of what the meditation practice is about is controlling your mind, controlling the thoughts that surface, being intentional with how you allocate your mental attention. And I think one of the most powerful parts of a silent meditation course is the juxtaposition of being in the class, as it were, in the meditation hall, as you work vigorously to kind of focus your mind and on a particular thing like breathing or your bodily sensations. But then in the break periods, observing that very same mind immediately shoot off in a million different directions and dig up these memories and think all sorts of crazy thoughts. And the goal is by the end of the 10 days, you'll be able to control that a bit more, and so that the random things don't just infiltrate your thought stream, but rather you're thinking about things that you want to think about, and you're more present in the moment in which you're living at the time.
Now, how long did it take before you could feel the randomness at least dialed down a bit, if not controlling your mind with laser-like precision? When did the randomness begin to attenuate?
I think for everyone it's different. For me, it was around 7 or 8 days into the 10-day course, which we did 10 hours of meditation a day. So that to me means about 70 to 80 hours of meditation into the course. I felt like I had a stronger ability to really control my mind and control my attention. But that was in the context of a silent retreat where I was not writing, I was not reading, I was not talking to anyone. Since I've come back into real life and reality, I've meditated every day. I think I'm at 36 consecutive days now. But I have not yet been able to achieve the kind of mental focus and clarity that I achieved in the course, because I sit down, I try to meditate, and I have the hundreds of emails that I've dealt with in the last week, and just all my life recent events occupy my mind. And so it took me 80 hours in the context of the course, which was a highly controlled environment. And what I'm trying to figure out is how long will it take me in real life to get back to that same point.
What was the experience like of after this retreat, first going on the internet again?
One of the weirdest things that happened to me was that I pulled out my iPhone at the end of the course to actually text a friend or actually text my dad, I guess, that I was alive and well. And my thumbs felt really big. Like it just, I just hadn't used the phone in 10 days. And so typing was very hard. And that was my
autocorrect.
Yeah, tons of autocorrect. And that was kind of my first reaction. Like, wow, it is in only 10 days. It really doesn't feel as natural. The other second thing I noticed when I went back online and surfed some news sites is how little had happened in the world. I think the Olympics had started. Mitt Romney visited Israel. And I guess there was a shooting in Colorado, all meaningful in their own way, but really nothing too consequential in my own life, at least. And so I didn't really miss much, even though that's the common fear when you go off the grid for 10 days.
Right. It seems like there's two possibilities here. Maybe they coexist, that you perform better, one performs better on the grid, on the net, connectedly, after they have spent time off it, or if they regularly spend time off it. And then another theory says that you get worse at keeping up with the sort of digital life if you go away for a while. Do you think one is correct of those, or is there some sort of balance of truth between them?
They kind of, I do believe that life is kind of a series of sprints, not a one long marathon. And from a productivity and health perspective, it is best to run a sprint, take some rest, run a sprint, take rest, run a sprint, take rest. Just as a general lifestyle thing. Now, mapped to being on the grid, I do think that you're more effective. At least I feel more effective when I'm 6 days on, 1 day off, 6 days on, 1 day off. And one of the things I'm trying to do, not to kind of get into kind of tactical productivity hacks, but my friend Cal Newport taught me this, that a lot of people, will kind of do 2 or 3 hours on a Saturday and do 2 or 3 hours on a Sunday of work, as opposed to just taking all day Saturday or all day Sunday off. And so this weekend, actually, we're chatting here on Sunday night. I basically took all day Saturday off, and I worked all day today. And I find that a healthier dynamic than a few hours on Saturday, a few hours on Sunday.
You mentioned this meditation retreat was in Northern California. Here we are in San Francisco. It seems like the San Francisco Bay Area and the Valley, they have this distinctive combination of what we might call Californian spirituality and Californian technological intensity. They seem to go together in a strange way. I mean, one's highly untechnological, one is state-of-the-art technology, but they're sort of twinned in my mind. You know what I mean?
This has been a topic that was examined when Steve Jobs died, and John Markoff, the New York Times technology reporter, wrote a book about how hippie culture informed the early technology revolution in Silicon Valley. And so there has the theme of, not that meditation's hippie, but kind of countercultural, whether it's Burning Man or meditation courses or other kind of communes here in the Bay Area or Northern California, Nevada, as you will. how that I do think there remains that remains a strong influence on the tech industry. I'm not sure if it's as strong as when Steve Jobs was getting going, for example, but I know many friends in the tech industry who go to Burning Man, many friends in the tech industry who wrote me after my blog post have gone to meditation courses and often find themselves in those kind of more spiritual places because they reject mainstream religion, but still want something deeper and more meaningful. They know that no matter how attached they are to their machines, the machines are not providing the emotional and spiritual sustenance that humans tend to need to live meaningful lives. And so they search for something more, and they're not getting that in a church or temple or synagogue or whatever. So they're looking elsewhere.
Having grown up in San Francisco, do you consider yourself somehow steeped in this Northern Californian sensibility, like you can make use of it as a native to it, or how does that seem to you? Have you made yourself an outsider in some sense that can evaluate it objectively, or are you more objective because you did grow up around it? What do you think?
I think it's key when talking about California to talk about kind of the three Californias. There's San Francisco, Los Angeles, and everything else.
Right.
And even here in Northern California, I mean, one of the funny things about Northern California is that a lot of people in Northern California, north of San Francisco and even more south, like in Santa Cruz, wear these stickers that say NorCal. And there's this notion in youth culture of NorCal pride. Like, yeah, we're from NorCal.
Mostly about burritos, right?
Well, I think it's about a lot of things, but no one in San Francisco actually has those bumper stickers or explicitly has NorCal pride, because San Francisco itself is a city in which to have pride, and you feel from this area. Now, if you're from, random town California, an hour and a half north of San Francisco, may not feel pride in that. So you kind of appeal to the broader geographic culture.
You're going to have that or a State of Jefferson sticker, right?
Right, precisely. So I think it's really key, like, when you talk about it, I think San Francisco, as I'm a native of San Francisco, and therefore I have been exposed to the larger cultural and geographic dynamics of Northern California. But I think just as it's hard to lump Los Angeles in with what happens in, say, Eastern Riverside County, right, it's hard to lump San Francisco proper in with what's happening in Northern California, because San Francisco has a lot of traditional, kind of traditionally elite subcultures that are perhaps not, don't play as nice with, you just spend some time in Pacific Heights, for example. That subculture doesn't play as nice with the counterculture stuff we're talking about in Northern California.
This is a subject you approached in the Startup of You, in the previous book before the Startup of You, My Startup Life. Yes, indeed. You approached this, but the sense that you grew up here and surrounded by the kind of entrepreneurship that you see in San Francisco and Silicon Valley, how much did it form your young consciousness that this is the most fruitful thing you can do, is to get into tech startups?
Well, I think the people who are around you matter. One of the most highlighted sentence in the Kindle edition of The Startup of You, the second book, is the sentence: "The fastest way to become to change who you are is to spend time with people who are already the way you want to be." And it's this, there's a common line that's related to that, which is, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time around. So the people around you shape what you do, how you think, what you believe, what you see as cool or not cool. And by definition, the people around you are the people who live near you. And so that's kind of how I would get to, where you grow up, where you spend a lot of time physically matters, because that's the social network in which you are enmeshed. And so I grew up in a social network where starting companies was cool, where there were clear role models and examples of people who were doing this. So that matters a lot. Now, I think what I would say, how that's changed, though, in the last decade, and how it will continue to change, is that, I was fortunate to grow up in Silicon Valley. But if you grew up, say you're growing up in Kansas City today, or I've been around the world and spoken to people in some pretty remote, unpopular places, perhaps, and they're not doomed, right? They may used to have been doomed if they wanted to pursue, say, entrepreneurship, a path that's not always widely embraced by culture. Like here in Silicon Valley it is, but go to Japan, and talk to young people and ask them if it's okay to start a business, and they may have a not so positive response because the people around them aren't encouraging it. But that's changing because now, because of the internet, because of online communities, you can, in a sense, enmesh yourself in social networks in other geographies or networks that are geographically diverse. And so if you're a youth in Tokyo, you can connect with youth in California and absorb that influence. You're no longer just constrained to the geography in which you're living.
I hear two main threads in the grander public conversation about this kind of thing. Some say, on one extreme, some say, doesn't matter where you live anymore because we all live on the internet. Another extreme would say, now the internet makes it more important than ever to live in a place like, for example, San Francisco or wherever, depending upon your interests, because the internet has intensified the sort of augmented reality that with augmented reality, you get even more of an advantage out of where you live now. Where do you fall on that?
Well, Colin, would you say you continue to live on LiveJournal?
Only when I'm cloning a post I've made elsewhere and just making sure
that used to be a culture of yours, right?
Well, if you go back to 2001, I would say that if you pie charted it out, it'd be a big chunk, I think, of my life would my online life.
Yeah.
When I dialed up and when I was on dial-up till 2003.
If AOL connected successfully.
Prodigy internet thing.
Prodigy, right? Well, this is a classic debate, and the truth is, it both matters more and it matters less. That is where you live, and here's why it matters less. For the reason we just talked about, right? The internet allows people to connect with folks around the world, get exposed to those ideas, connect with resources. So if you're in small town USA, you still have the opportunity to read blogs by top tier venture capitalists and connect with other entrepreneurs who can help foment your ideas. So that's why where you live matters less. Now, why it matters more is that in America, at least, in a lot of developed economies, creative work and what Richard Florida calls the creative class, those are the people who are winning in this economy, right? It's people who use their brains and their creative instincts, not necessarily their hands and their brawn to succeed in the labor market. And creative kinds of work benefit from collaboration. And collaboration tends to happen best in person still. And so for that reason, if you're in a creative line of work, and I'm using creative in the broadest possible sense, not just painting or something, yes. But most business, journalism, even medicine, the whole slew of fields where you need to be creative. You need to be educated, creative, collaborative, and that still happens in person. And for that reason, it's very wise to live in a place where those creative juices can flow with others.
You could say you're never going to get higher bandwidth than being in the same room with a person as far as a connection goes.
Absolutely.
And it brings me to the collaboration with Reid Hoffman that you have in this book, the second book, The Startup of You. But you wrote something about this on the blog recently that fascinated me, and it ties in here. The process you had of discovering every type of entrepreneurship there is, or at least every type of activity there is, you would consider to be entrepreneurship, and how far it went beyond tech startups in Silicon Valley. I mean, tell me a little bit about how you discovered that and what you discovered.
Yeah, I mean, the thesis of the Startup of You is that every individual has to be the CEO of their own life and the CEO of their own career, and can profitably apply the strategies that entrepreneurs, when starting companies, use to their very career. So how entrepreneurs build a competitive advantage, adapt their business to change, build networks, take risk. Those are all things we can all do in our careers, whether we're running our own business or whether we're a doctor or a lawyer, or teacher, or whatever. For me, my arrival at that thesis came from interacting with two sets of people. One set, traditional entrepreneurs here in Silicon Valley who are innovative, creative, adaptive, all the things we've talked about, and interacting with a set of people around the world in my own kind of world travels who were not starting companies, but who were nevertheless very creative. They were adaptive. They were thinking differently about how they build their career. So they may be focused on natural resource extraction in South America, working at a big company with thousands of employees, but applying a lot of the same techniques that Silicon Valley entrepreneurs use in terms of thinking about strategy and stuff. And so it was that connection that got me excited about the Startup of You thesis. And Reed had noticed something similar in that he was investing in startup entrepreneurs starting traditional companies, and through LinkedIn was helping connect millions of professionals in a range of industries, and observed similar tendencies in what traditional entrepreneurs were doing in building their businesses and what successful professionals were doing when building their careers.
There's a sense in which individuals should no longer want to be the best part they can, but in fact consider themselves to be the fundamental unit now. The unit is not the company they work for. The unit is themselves.
That's right. Dan Pink has a great line in Free Agent Nation, which is loyalty now extends horizontally to your network, not vertically to your employer.
Right.
And so this idea that your place of work, that your employer supersedes your personal identity, that age is over. It's your identity has to come first. You are the fundamental unit, I agree. And you operate within the context of a network. And the people in your network who include colleagues at your current employer, but also non-colleagues, just friends and other business allies. And that network tends to stay with you as you zig and zag and change jobs and build your career.
There is a memorable section in the book of describing, I think, addressed toward people who think of networking, think of it building a network, and they think of the sleaziest possible thing. I mean, what is the negative stereotype of networking?
Sleaziest, I think, image of networking is the guy at a cocktail party with, business cards in hand, passing them out with reckless abandon because he mistakenly believes that the name of the game is to have as many short conversations with as many different people as possible. So it's a huge emphasis on light, weak ties and acquaintances.
And he's making his pitch constantly, no matter what that pitch is.
Exactly. Making his pitch, asking for things, trying to sell you something. Whereas, people who are thoughtfully network oriented, are intentional about how they build all sorts of relationships with all different types of people, and who, moreover, know that whether it's dating or in business, you always want to offer something to the other person first. You don't just want to ask for something, and you don't just look for that short-term transaction. You try to build a long-term relationship with an offer, with a positive, friendly gesture. And so that's I think the difference. And I think it's really unfortunate if you ask a lot of college students or young professionals about networking, a majority of them, I believe, kind of dismiss the topic out of hand or don't want to really think about it because they just associate it with that negative thing, and therefore I think miss out on a lot of opportunities that otherwise would accrue to them.
It seems to me, you yourself were networking before you had a defined idea of what networking was in your head, and perhaps even doing entrepreneurial activities before you said to yourself, I'm doing entrepreneurial activities. A lot of these actions in your life preceded their definition. Does that make any sense?
Probably. I think for me, like, one of the best ways, like, networking comes very easy if you love people and if you find people interesting. And so to the extent that you enjoy conversations with people and you enjoy learning and engaging and discussing ideas with people, then you do that. And for me, I just did that. I've been doing that my whole life. And it happens that that's very useful when building your professional network, because having great conversations with people builds great relationships and builds trust over time. And so you're right. I've been reaching out to interesting people for many years without a specific agenda. And the agenda is really just to get to know the person and to see how I can help the person. And more importantly, just have an awesome lunch conversation. And for a lot of those people in the years since I've first met them, I have gone back to them with specific professional questions or asked for favors and vice versa. And so it's turned into a really mutually rewarding relationship.
I guess this gets into the conversations that have circled around Dale Carnegie's book since he wrote them. But as someone who I assume would say this, can you effectively tell somebody to be interested in people? I mean, is that something you can say, you've got to be interested in people? I mean, does that make it can that make the wheel click in anybody's head. I'm having somebody is anybody fundamentally not interested in people, or is that something somebody can actually forget to be and legitimately say, oh, I haven't been interested in people, and they might actually just need the simple reminder.
I think the simple reminder can do the trick. A friend of mine, Seth Roberts, who until recently was a professor at Berkeley and who's a popular blogger in self-experimentation, talks about appreciative thinking versus critical thinking. In school we're taught to be critical thinkers, and critical it can mean a few different things, of course, that word. But specifically, he meant that to be a deep thinker, to be taken seriously in academia, when someone presents an idea or a project, you're taught to try to figure out what's wrong with it. What's broken with the thesis? Where did the thesis not quite hold up? What are the flaws in the experimental design? And if you do that, you're being a thoughtful, critical thinker. And he contrasts that with what he calls appreciative thinking. And appreciative thinking is where your first instinct is to ask, what's right about this idea? What's right about the project design? What's something that's redeeming or valuable about this idea?
What's promising?
What's promising? Where's the potential? And I think that is a philosophy that can map to a lot of things, including people. And, I sometimes do this. I meet someone and I'm immediately looking for why they're full of shit or what's annoying about them or something like that. Yeah. But if you really are focused and telling yourself, look for, what's unique about this person? What's exciting? Where do they seem original or unusually interesting? I think if you take that approach, no matter how high or low status the person is or how kind of obviously interesting or uninteresting the person should be, I do think that approach can shape how you perceive the interaction and make the interaction more valuable for you.
As for people, I suppose, so for places, I mean, did you start off having this native interest in places as well as you did in people, or was that something you cultivated through travel or through traveling correctly, quote unquote?
Well, people and place are intertwined for me. I've been to New York City lots of times, may say 24 times, and I have not been to almost any major tourist attraction. And
I stayed out of Times Square.
That's right. Well, I have wandered around Times Square, but spending time in MoMA or other things that you're supposed to do, Central Park.
Right. Whatever Fisherman's Wharf equivalent you can think of.
Exactly. And, because for me, when I go to New York City, I tend to sit in coffee shops and I meet with people all day long because it's the people who bring me there and cause me to visit. It's the people who cause me to return to Santiago, Chile a few months ago to see my friends, to catch up with people. And so certainly you can appreciate the physical geography and landscape of a place. And I love the landscape of, say, the Southwest in America, New Mexico, that kind of place, those kind of places, Utah. But to me, a place is the people. And I otherwise I'm not interested in the museums or other kind of cultural institutions. It's just the people.
San Francisco is San Franciscans.
That's exactly right.
Let me ask you this. The Startup of You nearly opens with it. That's not a literal illustration, but in text, an illustration of Detroit, the state of Detroit, what Detroit has become. That is a place that I would imagine it took some appreciative thinking. It strained the appreciative thinking muscles. Is that true?
It did. And, it's good to bring up Detroit actually when we're talking about people and places because you're right. In the book, we do use Detroit and its rise and fall as a metaphor for what can happen to companies and individuals. Detroit, of course, many young people forget that was once the Silicon Valley of its day, was truly the innovation heart of the world.
General Motors as Google. It's hard to imagine.
That's right. General Motors is Google. I think any time, this is the entrepreneur gift, you could argue, is to see opportunity amidst problem and despair. When other people are complaining, the entrepreneur is scheming. And, I was in Athens, Greece, about a year ago and met a bunch of entrepreneurs who were thinking about leaving because, Greece is in shambles, basically. And, no one's, for example, picking up any of the garbage. Like I was driving around Athens and there's garbage stacked up in every street corner.
So basic services have faltered.
Yeah, every government worker is striking. So that day, all the garbage people were striking. Actually, they were striking all week, so no garbage get picked up. And we were talking about
a small island. I don't know how that's going to end up.
That's right. It was a disaster. The smell was not pleasant, and But we were talking about, hey, that's a problem. There's also an opportunity. If I'm a wealthy Greek person, I want my garbage picked up. And if the government's not going to do it, someone else better do it. So why not start the business of going around and servicing wealthy people's garbage collections? And that's a simple example, and it's probably naive for various reasons. I'm not familiar with the culture, but I think that's how entrepreneurs look at issues, the kind of conditions of despair. And I think you can do the same with Detroit. A lot of people are abandoned in Detroit. How can you be contrarian and be appreciative and find something that's redeeming about it? Not only just in terms of the mindset, but also for the business opportunity.
I'm trying to think of what the demonym is. Detroiter? Detroitian? What do you have an idea of what that word is?
Good question. I do often ask this. Like San Franciscan's easy, New Yorker's easy. Yeah.
Angelino is tougher.
Angelino is tougher, but that's well established as the word.
Yes. But the Detroit, I'll say Detroiter. I mean, did you get a sense of if the Detroiter retains their robustness even in the face of Detroit itself hollowing out a bit?
No, and again, it's the people-place intertwinement. Like, I think your morale, your view about the world is deeply shaped by those around you. And so when those around you tend to be fleeing or be unemployed, or illiterate, or as whatever the case may be in Detroit, that does bear on you. And so, yes, as Detroit as a city has fallen, kind of inextricably, the people have fallen, and that's, I think, shaped in a negative way the psyche of every Detroiter.
The listeners will have noticed some references to this, and readers of your blog will see references to the world of broadly speaking, Latin America, but especially South America as well. What's exciting about South America to you?
I think every part of the world can be exciting in its own way. And I think there are a few things that contribute to my interest in South America. First, I do like to be contrarian, I think, by nature. Everyone who's interested in business and entrepreneurship obsesses about China and India. A few talk about Latin America. Some talk about Brazil. Some talk about Mexico. Almost no one talks about Chile. Almost no one talks about Argentina, Colombia, Costa Rica, whatever the country may be. And so that's one reason why I am drawn to the underrated, under-discussed place. Just like I like discovering underrated people. Who's the person that's for some reason overlooked?
Right. Whose stock is low and it's not going to be low soon.
That's right. And, and I think the stock metaphor is very apt because, in the stock market, to buy low, you have to believe something others do not. That's how you buy low and then sell high. That's the way you make money is through some contrarian belief. And so anyway, I think natural contrarianism, when coupled with language, I'd studied Spanish in school, and Spanish seems like a language that I can get a hold of. And I think to understand and to be effective in a place, you need to be able to speak the language. And so that was one of the kind of random, accidental reasons that I got interested in the region. And I think once you start spending time in a place, you start to get familiar and comfortable and want to go back, and you build relationships with people, and then it just becomes this strong relationship. And for me, I've been more interested in more time in fewer places in recent years rather than less time in more places. So I've gone back to Latin America several times because I like this idea of home bases around the world as opposed to be in every country in the world, like my friend Chris Gillibo, who you interviewed actually.
He's been on the show, and I don't know where he was when I was Skyping with him, but he might have been on a plane right then. Who knows?
Indeed, and I believe he's 135 countries out of 160. Is that the?
Oh, he's getting there. Yeah, we talked about that. Yeah,
or maybe I can't. How many countries are there in the world?
193, maybe more or less since I checked.
How you count? Then he must be 160. There's only 20 or 30 countries left. I love Chris, but Chris's approach, at least in this part of his life, to travel is a short amount of time in lots of places. And I think if I spent a lot of time in Africa, I'd probably be as passionate about Africa as I am about Latin America. I just happen to have continued to spend time in Latin America because of the language thing, because of the contrarian thing. So I tend to be passionate about it.
No, I understand. And tell me this. I mean, Argentina, easy to understand why entrepreneurs might not be thrilled about going into Argentina. Chile, though, La Inglaterra del Sur, no? It's stable. It seems like I hear the food sucks, but other than that, I mean, it's not a bad place to start a company in the public mind, right?
I think so. I think Chile actually in the last couple of years has gotten more attention, notwithstanding my prior comment about people mostly overlooking the region. And that's because the government has made several attempts to become more visible as a country that's unusually stable, unusually prosperous, and unusually friendly to business and free market enterprise. And so there's so many different factors that affect whether a place is a good place to start a business. Argentina is a much bigger country, a much bigger domestic market, but is run by a government that doesn't respect free enterprise, basically. And Chile is a smaller country, much smaller market, but much more stable. And so in that way, it's easier to get a company off the ground, but you have to be ready to sell to the global marketplace, not just the Chilean marketplace. So pros and cons. But yeah, I think Argentina, for most entrepreneurs today, is seen as too unstable a place to start a company.
You could maybe start a new country within it, though. That might be.
Well, this charter city movement is alive and well in Honduras. I don't know if you're tracking that, but
what are they doing there?
Well, Paul Romer, who's an economist, spearheading this charter city movement, which is basically trying to create Hong Kongs in poor countries, I believe has confirmed an agreement with the Honduras government to create, the equivalent of Hong Kong within Honduras. Oh. So its own set of regulations and laws, and try to kind of carve out a piece of the country to be this experimental city-state.
Do you know where they're going to do this? How far out of Tegucigalpa is this going to be? Is this near something established, or way off where nothing is?
Well, I'm not sure, but I do have a lot of respect for you, Colin, that you're able to pronounce that capital, because
it's just a lot of syllables. It's not hard to pronounce.
But that's the memorable part of the question you just asked, is that pronunciation.
That's your takeaway, listeners. Tegucigalpa, Honduras. They have some sort of elaborate bus system that doesn't work very well. That's all I know.
I'm sure Tyler Cowan is could say something very insightful about where to buy the best tortillas.
Yeah, he can tell you about the food in Tegucigalpa, no doubt.
Yeah, which bus stop to get off of to get the tastiest tortilla.
Yes. I liked that book of his, that recent Economist Gets Lunch. Got to bring him back on the show. But Chile, San Francisco, where else might count as a sort of as a main location for you in this world, or secondary? What else ranks high as a place you go back to or are charged by?
The two other places are Zurich and Tokyo. And in fact, if you think about San Francisco, Santiago, Zurich, and Tokyo, one thing they all have in common is that they're all some of the wealthiest cities/countries in their respective regions. Right. And I don't think that's an accident. It's not because I like being around rich people or something like that. It's just because I like first world amenities, frankly. I've traveled throughout the third world, and there's just fascinating countries, and I've spent, there's a lot of growth that happens there, but I'm also somewhat skeptical of this idea of, taking just cold showers for 3 months in a row somehow builds character.
If you didn't backpack or cross it, you didn't gain anything from it, my friend.
That's right. And so, I like that Tokyo and Japan is so wildly different from our first, from American culture, and yet still offers as good, sometimes better, kind of quality of life amenities. And Zurich in Switzerland is very much like the U.S., I think, in ways, but also I think seems unique within Europe, and not just because they have their own currency, but for other reasons as well. And Santiago in Latin America is one of the most stable, most prosperous cities within all of Latin America. And so I think that's what I like. I like places that are stable, that are preferably different, but aren't so jarring or difficult that it kind of detracts from whatever my day-to-day work is.
And they're all definitely non-war zones, but I think Zurich is certainly the one that will stick out to people the most, stick out to listeners, because it pops up near the top of those, livability surveys you see all the time. And commonly, cities that rise to the top of livability surveys, it might be a Vancouver or a Portland or an Adelaide, cities that are fun to visit, don't get me wrong, but exciting things don't, as a rule, happen in them, or at least globally exciting things. Zurich, though, Zurich is different.
Well, let me say this. The cities that are fun to visit tend not to be the places that are fun to live in, or I should say easy to live in. So actually what I think if you had to rank popular tourist destinations, I don't think Vancouver, Zurich, or Santiago would appear towards the top. Right. People go to Buenos Aires, people go to Paris to visit if they want excitement. This is kind of this is my view on New York City. I love New York City as a place to visit. It seems a much different experience if you wanted to live there.
Yes.
Similarly, Los Angeles, great place to live, in my view, not a great place to visit.
Right, you have to know every strategy in the book before you can have a good time there, it seems.
That's right. And so that's, I think, a key distinction. I think when I think about Santiago, Zurich, perhaps Tokyo, but certainly Zurich and Santiago, what they have in common is that they're excellent places to live, not super interesting places to visit. Zurich is the definition of orderly, is the definition of on time.
Trains pull up when you want them, I would imagine.
That's right. And that matters a lot if you're commuting to work 5 days a week. It's not critical if you're visiting looking for something exciting.
Right. What is the state of, broadly speaking, entrepreneurship in a place like Zurich? I mean, what do you see there as far as people making their own way?
It's reasonably good. Google has their biggest campus in Europe in Zurich, and that's created a lot of activity. I think if you think about Europe, London is the hotbed of most entrepreneurship, probably followed by Berlin, and then Zurich I think up there is maybe third slot. I mean, I think the stereotypes about the Swiss are that they're very focused on traditional careers like in banking, and not as wild, innovative, rebellious.
Someone's got to manage those secret Swiss bank accounts.
Someone's got to, for people like you and me who always are trying to offshore our money.
Yeah, especially me.
I know all that Kickstarter. they want as lowest tax burden as possible, and so the Swiss become handy. But anyway, I think so I think that cultural residue is in like in a lot of places is not as true as people think it is, but it still does shape the realm of career possibilities, I think, of young Swiss. I don't think the average young Swiss person is as inclined to think about starting a company as, say, someone here in the Bay Area.
Now, it's fascinating here in San Francisco. It's a combination of a city people love to live in, people love to visit, but a city where real things happen, where there is that churn, there is that electricity to the place, but it's also one that is regarded as the second most popular tourist town in the United States after DC. It's a combination I wouldn't expect, where it's charged, yet it is also a place where Germans ride cable cars around until the cable cars break down, which often happens.
You're right. I do think in my place, good place to live, good place to visit dichotomy, if that's true, San Francisco actually is one of the few exceptions, I believe, where it seems like a good place to both live and visit. It's certainly a great place to visit because it's dense. And for Europeans, it reminds them of Europe. And it's a good place to live because unlike a lot of parts of New York City, there are kind of specific residential areas that are set aside from the hustle bustle of city life, as it were. Where we are right now here in South Beach is not that way. Actually, we're more closer to downtown, but there are many parts of the city that are kind of classically residential, and that often contributes, I think, to people feeling like they have a good quality of life and a work-life balance, as it were. So, yeah, anyway.
It does seem like an easy place to lose perspective on if you grow up here and live here your whole life. Tell me what the traveling, what's spending so much time away. Does it make you see the place? Does it let you see San Francisco clearer or more clearly?
A little bit. I think the best travel journeys are always when done with a clear understanding of your home base. I've spent a lot of time thinking about urban nomadicism, and I've met a lot of people on the road who are nomadic. In fact, I was at Chris Guillebeau's conference a few weeks ago, the World Domination Summit in Portland. And I met...
It's quite a city to dominate the world from, by the way.
Indeed. It's a truly global mecca. But I met at least two people. I asked, doing the traditional small talk, how you doing? Good. Where are you from? I'm nomadic was the answer from at least two people. And
literally that word. I'm nomadic.
I'm nomadic. And I said, what does that mean? He's like, well, I travel the world. Well, how do you make money? Well, I sell ebooks, of course.
Okay. That's the natural occupation of the modern nomad, selling ebooks.
That's right. Selling ebooks, selling PDFs. In fact, many of them sold, or the two that I was talking to were interested they wrote and sold AdWords against, travel blog posts. And
It's what we all aspire to as children.
That's right.
We just hope to sell some AdWords on travel blog posts.
That's right. And, but, as I look deep within their eyes, just as George W. Bush once said, he looked deep into Vladimir Putin's eyes, I did sense some loneliness, some disconnectedness, and I'm being a little facetious here, but I'm serious that I think people who are nomadic, whether they self-identify as such or not, do have a hard time building meaningful relationships. And so, to your question, when I'm abroad, when I come back, I see San Francisco maybe more clearly, but more importantly, I'm reminded of the power of deep and close relationships and the importance of always watering this garden here in San Francisco before I embark on some international journey, and to be sure to come back with some frequency, even if it's once or twice a year. And I've been here much more than that, but to make sure I have those strong connections.
There's the danger of just floating into the void and not being able to find your way back out of it, right?
That's right. I think the notion of traveling internationally for extended periods of time away from home is incredibly romanticized. And what we need to be happy are intimate relationships.
Right. We can't all be Australian 19-year-olds taking their 8th month. You know what I mean?
That's right.
You meet a few of them here in San Francisco, I would imagine. There's
Absolutely.
Meet them in Los Angeles. I guess they are everywhere. In the, you might say, the aftermath, or the there's got to be a more positive word than aftermath, but in the period after the startup of You has come out, you've been able to gauge reactions. People have been able to compare the observations you lay out in the book to their own life experience. Have you been able to get much feedback from the world itself on how well the ideas you and Reid Hoffman lay out in the book, how closely they align with people's experiences of the sort of the way that careers work now?
So far, the feedback has been mostly positive and mostly reinforced our theses. And I think the reason why is that the competition's weak.
Really?
If you want to stand out, I always say this about public speaking, like most people are so bad that to be seen as great, you need to only be average.
Huh.
And similar with career strategy, the models that have been put forth in recent years are so inadequate, so insufficient to capture the dynamic economy in which we are all living, that people are yearning for something new and different and better, and something that maps closer to their reality. And so even if the startup view doesn't match entirely to their reality, I think it's a lot closer than prior efforts, say, What Color's Your Parachute, or other such books that talk about a predictable career escalator or career ladder.
Who Moved My Cheese is on there somewhere?
Who Moved My Cheese is in the general broad canon, perhaps a bit broader than classic career stuff. But anyway, whether it's your career counselor at school or a book you pulled off the shelf, in our view, few, if any, accurately portray what young to middle-aged professionals in first world countries are going through today. And so we had weak competition.
Why is the competition so inadequate? I struggle for a possible guess as far as to why that would be. It seems like somebody would notice, and you'd be faced with a competitor right behind you or right ahead of you. But no, huh?
It's true that, and I think it's a very good kind of intuition around, like, look, if there's a clear market need, why hasn't anyone filled it? Like, we are a country full of people looking for opportunities to write the next best-selling book or create the next great business. I guess to be precise about what I'm saying, it's there actually have been lots of books and articles about the problem. Few have done both problem and solution. And so, for example, there have been books that talk about, the world changing, globalization, offshoring, outsourcing, the world of work's change, unemployment. But the solution set is very predictable and old school. And so they don't actually follow up the problem statement with a solution that draws on the very best of what we know about how to survive in uncertain times. And we think that's entrepreneurship. But a lot of the other entrepreneurial thinking, I should say, what a lot of the older or competitive books talk about is the same old stuff, like find your passion, right? Which they think is as valuable an idea and went during the age of the career ladder and career escalator as in the age of today, which is much more dynamic.
When we talked almost 5 years ago, we talked about the idea of life entrepreneurship you had been writing about on the blog quite a bit. Tell me how, has that idea changed in your mind of what life entrepreneurship is? Is that still a useful concept to you, or is that something that has fed the ideas in the startup of you? It means clearly, at least partially, but what is the state of life entrepreneurship as such in your thinking now?
It's true that actually in my first interview with them on Marketplace of Ideas, I did talk about that, and I think that was the early those were the early seeds that ultimately bore fruit in the startup BU. I think
my royalty checks are coming soon, right?
Of course.
Okay.
I think where my head was at in 2007 was more about the mindset, the idea that we have agency, we have the power to be the CEO of our own life, and there's an idea that the mindset of an entrepreneur is analogous to life. That was, I think, life entrepreneurship. What we did in Startup EU is flesh out the specific strategies and tactics that entrepreneurs use. So what wasn't clear to me in 2007, but what has become clear, what we purvey in the book is ABZ planning. How to both plan and adapt in a very specific way. How to build your network and tap and derive intelligence from that network to make better decisions. To draw the parallels between how entrepreneurs take risks and how every individual can take risks. So it's beyond just the mindset, which we codify in Startup U as permanent beta, and get into the specifics about and connect the dots between what entrepreneurs do and what everyone can do. And it's not connecting all of the dots, because not everything from entrepreneurship is applicable to life, right? Fundraising is different. You don't really have a board of directors, that kind of thing. Right. But there are a lot of things that are quite analogous.
This may sound like a broad question. I guess it is, but interpret it however you like. If someone is consistently curious about people, places, things, and acts on that curiosity in good faith, can they fail? I mean, it seems like that sets you pretty straight to begin with.
If someone's curious?
If someone's consistently curious, acts on it, about people, places, and things, that's the best arrow I can think of to follow, but it seems like it puts you in pretty good stead, no?
Curiosity is key. I think it's a critical part of the equation, but it's insufficient in and of itself. Right. And so I think curiosity drives a lot of the behavior that leads people to excellent opportunities. One of the concepts in the book is that careers tend to be marked by breakout opportunities. It doesn't tend to be slow and steady progress up and to the right. People tend to have certain jobs or opportunities which dramatically accelerate their career. It's the breakout role in a movie, or it's the job opportunity that someone offers you that you're not quite qualified for, but you gotta catch a break and it accelerates you. And so curiosity, we write in the book, is the flame that fuels a lot of that stuff. But we always need to think about, when thinking about career stuff, we always need to think about the market realities in which we're living. And so one of the key theses of the book is that whether it's curiosity or passion or whatever, because a lot of people would say, just think about your passion and that's enough. Follow that passion, right?
Yeah, what if your passion is Asian women?
That's right. If your passion is Asian woman, I don't know who would have such a.
It's impossible. I mean, I don't know. I don't know anybody. Do you know anybody?
But suppose you live in a place where there aren't many Asian women.
Yeah. I can't imagine.
You would have to.
That would suck for the person who was into that.
Hypothetically, but you'd have to accommodate that market reality, right? And if you're in a Midwestern town where it's just all white people, you can move, but if you're stuck there, you have to align your existing assets with your aspirations and the market realities. And so that holds for curiosity too. You always have to check curiosity against, you may be curious about some esoteric thing that doesn't actually monetize very well.
Indeed. There's another concept that I remember talking to you about in the Marketplace of Ideas, and it was a big subject on the blog at that point, on your blog. But the idea of positive bulk randomness and exposing yourself to it, and how to do that, how best to do that, how best to use it. And it resurfaces under a different name, it seems, in the startup of you. But how does randomness fit into the picture for you at this point? Just an update on this concept after we've updated the last one.
Bulk positive randomness is one of these concepts that stuck from my startup life. And as you probably know, Colin, you don't always perfectly predict which of your tweets or blog posts or ideas will be the ones that stick. It's not often the one that you think it is. And bulk positive randomness is one of these concepts in my startup life that people just grabbed onto, and I continue to think hard about it. In the startup review, we talk about randomness. I think we call it courting selective randomness is the kind of reframe in the new book as key to discovering good career opportunities. Where I've evolved to on that idea is that I think people, I really am thinking hard about kind of tempo and pace in life and how that shifts in different years and different months. You have different tempos, and sometimes you're feeling more interested in randomness, and sometimes you're not. Sometimes you're focused on executing the thing in front of you. Sometimes you want newness and novelty and so on. And so I think it doesn't have to always be on or always be off. It can be kind of a switch. And certainly, to take a romantic example, if you're single, you ought to be exposing yourself to much more randomness to meet potential mates than if you're in a relationship. And similarly, if you're actively looking for a new job or career opportunity, you ought to be doing that much more. Right. So people shouldn't get caught up in doing it all the time or none of the time, but they ought to think about when it makes sense to turn it on or off.
A strangely high amount of resonances and strong ones between developing your personal startup of a career and dating, aren't there? I mean, maybe that's just relatable for people, but there sure seem to be a lot of analogies, right?
Well, especially in the networking section, I don't think we pushed the analogy. In earlier drafts of the book, we talked about it more, but we decided in the end we didn't want to distract readers too much by talking about dating.
There's a market for that book too, I guess.
There is, but you probably be the better one to write that book on.
I'll get on it.
But one of the specific examples from dating is that men make this mistake all the time. Is they take a very short-term approach to a woman they meet. They have a short-term goal, like sleeping with a woman, and they pursue that kind of shamelessly.
We've all seen examples of this and cringed at embarrassment for them and said, I've never been that. Surely I've never been that.
Of course. The better way, of course, is the longer-term view. And I think, a lot of what entrepreneurs have to be incredibly persistent, incredibly patient. And I think patience, when it comes to building your network, is key. Similarly, in romantic context, patience is key. If you're over eager, it's a turnoff, and you alienate people. And I think, and that's this kind of weird dichotomy. I think people who entrepreneurs themselves and people who take an entrepreneurial view to life, it's that juxtaposition of being incredibly dogged and aggressive and scrappy and hustle in the way that entrepreneurs do in order to get ahead, and also be incredibly patient to wait for the right thing to develop, to let that relationship flourish into something meaningful and mutually rewarding. And that's an interesting tension that we actually don't fully explore in the book, but has emerged in this conversation.
You kind of have to be the guy who is taking every piece of internet stimulus that comes along and assimilating it, and also be the 10-day meditator. Kind of at the same time, you have to cultivate those two minds, don't you? The technology-free meditating sage and the Neil Stephenson character.
Well, it comes back to how we opened the conversation around tempo in terms of sprints versus a marathon, and attached to your technology and disconnecting from the technology. It is true that I think the wisest people today are able to deal with these kind of paradoxes, these seemingly opposite beliefs or behaviors, and to do both in your life is the sign of a wise man, perhaps.
I don't want to let go of randomness right away, because it seems like we're sitting in a major city. I come from one, you're in one as well. Cities, to me, it seems like you move to a city, you're moving to randomness in a way. You're kind of moving into a fount of randomness, or a machine that because there's not a lot of randomness in Muskogee or any given small town you could name.
Where's Muskogee? Is that your hometown?
No, Muskogee is it in Montana? I can't remember now. Oh, this is embarrassing. It's not my hometown. I grew up in Seattle, but
I thought you grew up in Northern California.
I was born in Northern California,
Okay.
Grew up in Seattle, and came back to betrayed my origins by moving to Los Angeles. As you know from living in San Francisco, there's no worse city than Los Angeles, right?
At this precise moment, that's true, because the Giants are playing the Dodgers in a critical 3-game series. But I have to keep my love of Los Angeles fairly private. You're right. I try to. That's why we've closed the door and added some soundproofing, because
You corked this room.
I don't want people to overhear that I find Los Angeles to be the best city in the country. But
how real is that stigma, by the way? If someone hypothetically, if someone enjoys Los Angeles and comes from or lives in the Bay Area, is there really the kind of stink eye?
Yeah, and this has been something that Herb Caen, the famous San Francisco columnist, and others have written about wrote about and continue to write about. And it's hard to tell how much of it's just the the age-old punchline of a joke, you know, if some degenerates here in San Francisco ship him to Los Angeles, so he'll be closer to his brethren. Yeah, that kind of joke. I don't know how much of that's people are, you know, that's serious or not. It's one of these things where it kind of when it's so it's sketched into the cultural lore, it kind of takes on its own truth. But you know, I think if you're honest and you ask most people who aren't baseball fans or when it's not baseball season, I think about when they ask about Los Angeles, a lot of them have very positive feelings. They've gone to school there. They have friends there. You know, they travel back and forth. And so I think it's actually much more amicable and certainly Silicon Valley and Hollywood as industries are cooperating now more than ever.
But cities as vectors, generators of randomness, do you buy the idea? Have you ever thought in that way? You get randomness by being in cities.
I think you have the potential to, but one of the common critiques of Los Angeles, one that I'm sure you're thinking about a lot more as you write about the city of Los Angeles, is that, you know, if you're in your car and drive to a parking lot and walk into a store and get back in your car and drive home, how much randomness are you exposed to?
That's why I don't have a car.
Ah, indeed. So you're doing what few do in the city, which is
ride my bike a lot and often the trains, I guess.
Right.
But I learned the city. I wouldn't learn it if I drove it, I don't think.
Yeah, and you certainly would get much less randomness. So I think like Los Angeles is one of these cases where the potential for randomness is almost infinite. The diversity is astounding. It's the most diverse human habitation in human history, as Robert Putnam put it. But to get exposed to it requires real work, and that's the kind of work most people don't want to do. And so a lot of parts of Los Angeles, as you know better than me, are racial enclaves or other cul-de-sacs that perhaps don't have as much randomness to the lazy resident.
And in San Francisco, there's still pretty good randomness, pretty good diversity, but you can get it by just walking. You can walk out your door and like go left for a while, and then maybe turn again, and you've found a lot just doing that. Or I mean, maybe that dries up after a certain point of living your whole life here. I don't know.
You get it visually. The most rewarding type of randomness, though, is something a little more meaningful than just eyeballing, hey, that person looks different than me, or I hear a language that's not English. Yes. Yeah, which is, I think this is the mistake people make about New York, speaking of cities and diversity. It's like you walk through Times Square, you hear a lot of different languages being spoken, and you soak that all in, and you say, wow, this is such a diverse place. But how much diversity is that really in terms of shaping who you are and how you think? Like, I think it's so much more visible in New York that people assume that they're the beneficiaries of this kind of randomness and diversity. But I'm a little skeptical of that. Like, how much does that really shape you? And I think similarly in Los Angeles, a lot of people, it's not visible. But in both Los Angeles and New York and San Francisco, for that matter, you have to work at it. Whether it's visible or not visible, easy or hard, it does require some effort on the part of the person in order to benefit from it.
What are you contemplating next as far as ways to affect your own thinking, ways to experiment on your own thinking, your own mindset, whether it is about cities or travel or entrepreneurship? And what seems promising is the next way, be it something meditative or be it some pursuit to refresh your own thinking, to keep your perceptions clear, or to just see how you can change how you approach things or improve that?
Well, the most important thing I'm going to do is to keep following Colin Marshall on Twitter.
Oh, I hear he's pretty good.
I recently
not a lot of followers, but
I recently favorited one of his tweets about sex is what happens when you're making other sexual plans.
It's what John Lennon should have said.
So that's always a place to start. I've also been thinking, I've never taken a drug in my life, and I am wondering whether I ought to, in a very controlled, mature way, experiment with certain drugs to see how that would affect my mind.
Like a hallucinogen or...
Yeah, something like that. I haven't done anything, and I'm not yet committed to doing that because I feel like I like the way I am now, and I'm learning so much, and I'm growing. I feel very confident in the sharpness of my mind, for example. Right. So why fuck with it, kind of thing.
I know what you mean. I've never used hallucinogens either, but there is that. You read smart people, Oliver Sacks, or you read him write about it, Steve Jobs, and it's like you just think maybe they actually saw some other dimension, or maybe they expanded their mind just a little bit that pushes them over the edge, and it could push me over the edge too. But you think of, you see some burnouts up in the hate, right?
You do. And, and so probably in the meantime, like yesterday, I floated in an all salt water pod.
They still have those? Yeah. Or is it 1987?
I floated in a pod of salt water for an hour with total sensory deprivation, and tried to get in touch with the the truth within me.
Did any truth come out? I mean, leave the listeners with what truths you got.
Well, for that, the listener would have to subscribe, not just read, but subscribe to the blog. That's the only place the inner truth really.
Learn to use an RSS feed, listeners. Come on.
I know. Isn't it sad that RSS is seemingly dying?
Has it?
Well, people say it is, but you know what? I'm as loyal an RSS reader as I ever have been, and it's now part of my identity. And goddamn it, I will start. Identity politics, nothing better than that. So let us
it's
all.
San Francisco, after all. There is nothing better.
Strength in numbers. So if you're an RSS reader, stick with me, stick with Colin, and we can move mountains.
We'll do fine. I've been speaking here in South Beach in San Francisco with Ben Casnocha, author of 2 books, My Startup Life, and co-author with Reid Hoffman of LinkedIn of The Startup of You. He's also got the blog. I've always typed in ben.casnocha.com. Is there a better address to type in than that?
Casnocha.com now works.
Oh, so you've moved on up.
Yeah.
In any case, Ben, thanks for taking the time today to come back 5 years later and sit down with me.
It's been a pleasure.
This has been Notebook on Cities and Culture. I've been Colin Marshall. You can keep up with all of the cultural creators, internationalists, and observers of the urban scene on the show at colinmarshall.org. Thanks. And special thanks to everyone who backed this season on Kickstarter: Danny Bolson, Brad and Laramie on Movies, Paul Doyle, Umberto Grant, Matt Howie, Andrew Hovanek, Mark Hines, Mary Gillander, Eric Graham, Will Graham, John French, Andrew Philippon Jr., Kimberly Hahn, Chris Kay, Andy Cooney, Mark Larson, Rebecca O'Malley, Michael O'Regan, Gail Poole, Blake Riley, Superfan Giovanni, Aidan Nullman, Adam Schaefer, Rob Schultz, Scott Schenker, Cam Smith, Kevin Smokler, Adam Sutherland, TSD, Thomas Interberger, Matt Warren, and Wayne Wright.